We have been following this fracas between the governor of Tamil Nadu and the DMK government. I expect that this will die down quickly, and the next thing that the DMK will rake up is the issue of fishermen and Sri Lanka. To understand this, we need to go back a little bit, almost 50 years, to understand some of the issues involved, how things came to here, and what are the ways to move forward with this. This is a multi-part video series because I want to keep them in short segments. This is part one of that series. So just tighten your seatbelts and listen to this saga. Here we go. The Palk Bay. The Palk Bay is a narrow strip of region that separates India from Sri Lanka. And as you can see here in the picture, the area is very, very small, and the corridor is quite narrow. As a matter of fact, the depth at most points in Palk Bay is only 10 to 15 meters. 10 to 15 meters. That is, you can see the floor of the ocean in these places. And the DMK government wants to, build a 𝙒𝙤𝙤𝙦 project where they want to cut through all this stuff. These guys are smoking weed, I'm telling you. They think that the idea here is to try and destroy Hinduism. There's no other reason for this, and try to do that by showing that, look, you think that Rama built this bridge, we show you we broke it. And all this is to get the brownie points from misguided minorities who think that they are special, and that once these people do that the minorities will vote for them. Well, the minorities are waking up. They're not as committed as DMK will find in the elections that follow. Anyway, that's a story for a different day and time. First thing is that the Palk Bay, there are many ways to approach Sri Lanka from the Indian coast. The one that we always talk about is the Rameshwaram, which is where it's very close. But you can see from the map here, there are places like Vedaranyam, from where also you can come straight down and approach the Sri Lankan northern coast, like Yarpanam, which is also called Jaffna. So there are many ways that you can connect from the mainland to the Sri Lankan coast. So what really happened? Let's go back to some initial days. And today I'm going to state the problem as these are the following friction points. The number one is that the Indian fishermen keep going into the Sri Lankan fishing waters to fish. And this deprives the Sri Lankan fishermen of their catch. The Indian side has a lot of mechanized trawlers, and I'll come to that in just 1 minute. And the Sri Lankan fishermen are very poor. They're still using the traditional motorboats or sailing boats to catch, and when they can't compete. In fact, the mechanized trawlers completely decimated the small fishing boat industry along the coast of Tamil Nadu, and these are called as vallams. So mechanized trawlers have completely decimated the small fishing boat industry, where fishermen used to own one boat, or 3 or 4 used to own one boat. They'll set sail and then go and catch and come. That stuff is all gone. This is 30, 40 years now. There is a thriving export industry for seafood that India does. And I'll come to all the details. What are the types of catch, why it is so attractive, why it is so profitable, and who is funding it. So the challenge here is that when the motorized vessels started operating along the India's coast, there are close to 6,000 of them. When they were operating on India's coast, they have essentially combed the length and breadth. Fish normally stay close to the coast. So once you've taken away, these are like what you call as the low-hanging fruit. The mechanized trawlers are so good that they just go and scrape up from the bottom. The entire thing is cooked up, including sometimes seaweed and even other sea, ecosystem. So now, were things like this even before? No. In 1974, something changed. India and Sri Lanka started talking about this new island called 𝙒𝙤𝙤𝙤𝙤, which surfaced after a squall. So these things happen. There is a small shift. Remember, I told you that Palk Bay is a very shallow bay. So it is very easy for a new island to form, just to come to the surface, and then suddenly both countries who are adjacent will lay claim to it. They'll sit down and talk, and this is what happened. So 𝙒𝙤𝙤𝙤𝙤 surfaced sometimes in the early 70s, and in 1974, the Indian government and the Sri Lankan government sat down to discuss. They agreed that any area in this region, any island in this region had a historic culture and perspective, and therefore that this is something that is common to both India and Sri Lanka. In 1976, an accord was signed by none other than Mr. Karunanidhi. Karunanidhi himself signed this thing. Now they'll say we want 𝙤𝙧𝙤𝙀𝑇𝑖𝑣 back, but these were the guys who actually gave it away. Whatever be the merits or demerits of it, they can't walk back and say now we shall get 𝙤𝙧𝙤𝙀 back. But you guys are the ones who gave it. What were you thinking when you gave it? Anyway, nobody asked these questions. You see, I will not be able to go and ask Mr. M.K. Stalin, listen, it is your dad who did it. Anyway, so these are some of the things where the narrative is not being allowed to be two-way. So what happened was that when this accord was signed in 1976, I'm just giving you the broad details. The Sri Lankan government got possession of the island, but the Indian fishermen could go and dock at 𝙤𝙧𝙤𝙀 Island, and if they wanted to dry their fishing nets, they were allowed to do so. And even to this date, the traditional fishermen who are having just a small boat with a sail, sometimes they also have motorized, they still go and do this thing. Okay, so the 𝙤𝙬𝙀 will be the next thing that the DMK will rake up. They have no other choices, guys. 3 or 4 things only. Sri Lankan Tamils, and that's a grand thing. Inside which they'll say, "Oh, Sri Lanka is being oppressive, that they are prisoning our fishermen, blah blah blah." And then they will also. So this is one big thing that they'll keep on talking about. The next thing that they will keep talking about is how the Brahmins have really denied social justice to the rest of the state. That's BS. That has been proved beyond how many times, I don't know, but they'll still keep taking it up. And if these fail, then they'll say that we will oppose Hindi, and then there's this secessionist tendencies. They have been right now what is happening is that many in the DMK party are disgruntled at being ignored, at being kept out of the gravy train. Just take my word for it, and which is why they keep showing all these, bimbo eruptions kind of thing. They have all these volcanic eruptions where they'll talk nonsense. They'll take pot shots. One of the ministers actually hurled expletives at the governor. They will plumb new depths in terms of civility and how you approach another human being. These people are one of the worst in terms of what kind of language they use, the way they treat women, and they'll always talk about social justice. Irony dies 1,000 deaths every time a DMK politician opens his mouth. Anyway, now, where did it all start? The problem started when bottom trawling started happening using mechanized trawlers. This damaged the ecosystem by even sucking out seaweed, seagrass, etc. So once that is gone, then there is no scope for new fish to come. There is no scope for any of these things to rejuvenate. And I don't know how that can be rejuvenated now. So the long and short of it is there is no near coast fishing left on the Indian shores. So what do? Well, what they do is they make all these mechanized trawlers. There are 6,000 of them, by the way. They make them to go, like they leave sometime in the evening from Indian coast, and by the time it is nightfall, they arrive at the Sri Lankan coast, and now they are depriving the Sri Lankan coast of all its catch, going to a bottom trawling. They are taking their stuff out, which is why the Sri Lankan government gets upset sometimes. Their navy imprisons some of these fishermen, but unfortunately the fishermen are not the ones who are owning these mechanized trawlers. The mechanized trawlers are being owned by politicians and some other entities, about which I'll talk in just one moment. Now, what is so precious about it? Well, some of the catch that you can find here is much sought after in domestic and international markets. There is the mandapam white shrimp, then there are crabs, there is tiger prawns, mandapam flower shrimp, and so on and so forth. Now, while all this was happening, the traditional small-time fishermen completely lost their way of life, and they have been dependent on, unfortunately, what I can say is church. Because along the coast now, practically 90% of the fishermen are converted into Christianity. And if you remember, we talked about this with Mr. Balagautam, where he said that even the government aid to these people goes through the church. Then it looks as if the church is the one arranging all the funding, because they'll conveniently claim credit. The government cannot go and talk to the fishermen anymore. These things have to change. But first of all, in order for things to change, we need to highlight some of these, disconnects that happen. The government administration sitting in Chennai perhaps doesn't even know the amount of data that I am putting out here. And this came out of my research. And this is a fairly detailed research. Like I said, this is just the part one. I'm going to give you a couple more parts to kind of completely explain what the problem is. The intent is not to show that there are problems. The intent is to show the problem, how to address the problem, and how to move forward. The whole thing is going to be covered in this series. Anyway, next, who is funding it? Close to 6,000 mechanized trawlers. And this is bought using black money of politicians and some other entities. Remember, Hawala is thriving. The Hawala can be done in either direction. That is, if an NGO doesn't want to go through the normal channels of FCRA, they can get the money into India through Hawala. So anyone who's thinking that, okay, the funding has now stopped to the minority groups, sadly mistaken. No. Think money is still coming in. Perhaps it is not at the same level as before, because now what happens is the money is not being trackable. It's not traceable because the money is coming through Hawala. Anyway, so just wanted to give you that point. So the fisheries, unfortunately, this is something that the government needs to look at instead of just keeping on socking it to the middle class by raising taxes. Fisheries are considered as part of agriculture, which means anything that you get out of this industry is tax-free. So we are giving a new way for the politicians, and these politicians belong to DMK, ADMK, and perhaps some other parties. I wouldn't even be surprised if some right now have taken refuge in the BJP. They all end up owning these things, and they say that this is all agricultural income, ergo no taxes. And also they are converting their black money into white. This is a layered problem. You have to take a look at it in some depth before you understand the scope of what these people are doing. They're very clever. These crooks who go by the name of politicians in Tamil Nadu, they are very, very clever. They know how to use the system. And if the system isn't working to their way, they know how to bend the rules. They also know how to manipulate the system. What happens is when the small fisherman cannot see, first of all, his sailboat will take days before he can go to Sri Lanka to catch. Plus, because he doesn't have power, he can easily be caught by the Naval Patrol of Sri Lanka. So what does he do? He will go and see if there is any day jobs in these mechanized trawlers. There are a few jobs available, and these are the innocent fishermen who get sent out to do the most dangerous missions, meaning much, much closer to the Sri Lankan coast and go and dredge there. And sometimes these guys will just run away when the Sri Lankan Navy Patrol comes, and they'll catch these innocent fishermen who are actually nothing but daily wages. So this is the scope of the problem. I've taken a lot of time to explain to you what the scope of the problem is. In the next few episodes, we look at a little bit more detail of what the problems are, and then we'll have all the solutions to this problem. Thanks for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. And don't forget to click on the bell button for notifications. Namaskar. Thank you.